Hello. I am here today with John Failla, the CEO of Pearl, one of the most interesting companies in the K-12 tutoring space. We are eventually going to talk about the new report on the state of the tutoring industry that John and the Pearl team just put out and Whiteboard supported. Uh, but before we get there, John, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, like how you ended up running Pearl? Like what's the story behind the company?
Yeah, I can do that. And first, Matt, thanks for having me on today. So, as you mentioned, Pearl's a pretty unique company in the tutoring space. We aren't another tutoring provider, but we're infrastructure. So, we're the trusted technology infrastructure behind a lot of the nation's most effective tutoring initiatives. And the way we do that is we work with states, districts for the most part, and provide them with the operational and data tools they need to either run their own in-house tutoring program or track the data of vendors and other folks serving their community. However, this is not where, the story started. It actually started in a University of Richmond classroom back in 2014 when I was an entrepreneurship major and had to start a company organic to personal experiences I had growing up. So when I was younger, I was fortunate. My mom was very active in my academics. She would get me tutors. They never really connected with me. And because of that, it led to more fights than anything else. So there was one year she got a tutor, Josh, who I was a competitive athlete. He was a competitive athlete. The day he came down to tutor me in math, my entire perspective on education changed because it was the first time there was really a relationship there. So Pearl actually started as a relationship-based tutoring company. We would work with or recruit university students, place them with local K-12 students who couldn't just tutor them, but also mentor them. And so this was back in 2015. When we started and started to grow, we saw that technology was getting in the way of the relationships we were trying to build. So we recruited a CTO who actually came to us from an education data company, built our first platform to grow our tutoring program. And funny enough, at that moment, he said, today you're a service provider, tomorrow you'll be SaaS, but at the end of the day, you're going to be a data company. And this was back in 2017. So I was like, I have no clue what that means, but it sounds good, so we'll go with it. So we built our own system, started to scale our system. Fast forward to 2019, and we started getting approached by other tutoring orgs saying, hey, we'd love to license your platform. So at that moment, we realized that, there were thousands of tutoring providers out there, but no real infrastructure solutions in the space. And all large industries have infrastructure behind them. So that's when we decided to just focus on the infrastructure side. COVID came, ARPSer was announced, the tutoring industry completely started to explode. And that's when Pearl started to receive inbound interest from states and districts looking to launch their own programs. So that is the, overnight 10-year story of how we started as a tutoring company, built a system, started to license that platform out, where now we are supporting more of these state and district based tutoring initiatives than any other infrastructure system in the space.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think what's sort of been interesting to me is tutoring pre-COVID was this sort of like existed outside the system intervention technique, right? Where, if your family had the means and or the time, uh, they could find a tutor for you, and that was great for the folks who had that. But I feel like it was sort of a dark corner of the industry,
Yep.
not from like a it was not a bad thing, but it just wasn't something people really knew much about. Like I school leaders didn't have any ability to track it.
Yes. And it's it was something people didn't know about. I like to say it was operating in the shadows of education. Because when we were running a tutoring company and we'd show up to schools, teachers would hate that we were there.
Hmm.
Because being a tutoring company fundamentally implied that teachers couldn't do a good enough job to keep students to pace. So they had to bring tutors in, which was never the case. But pre-COVID, tutoring companies and supports were definitely viewed a bit like that. What I think Esser did was bring tutoring into the spotlight and give it an opportunity to prove that it deserved to be in the forefront, post ESSER. And I think, based on what we saw in that report and also some of the great work we've seen providers do, it's definitely here to stay, not in the background, but, center stage as education move forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's worth acknowledging like COVID brought a lot of funding to it. It also brought a lot of concern, right? Because it was sort of the
Yep.
Wild West. So it's like you have this sort of shadow industry that people knew was impactful, but didn't really know how to harness. And then they were forced to sort of just accept it. And it led to, frankly, a lot of bad implementations.
Yep.
I think that's fair to say. And so what has always sort of attracted me to you and the Pearl model is not necessarily trying to make a judgment on whether something is good or bad, um, like inherently, but saying like what data is this producing?
Yep.
What different types of tutoring can we offer, and what impact do they have?
Yeah. Completely accurate, and it's part of the reason why, I only wish we started Pearl 10 years earlier than we did because the industry was forced to go through hyperscale without a foundation. And if you think about any industry being built like a skyscraper, the first step isn't building the first floor, it's digging 2 stories into the ground to lay the cement and the bedrock. Tutoring was thrust into the spotlight and thrust into the middle of education and didn't have time to really build that infrastructure to identify what are the right data points for districts to ask for. What's the definition of that data point? What's the way that data point could be shared? Also, one of the things we noticed during ESSER was that tutoring companies were also a very easy way to get money off the books. So some of these districts had so much money that they loved being able to work with tutoring providers because they could cut the check, get that money off the books, and then go focus what other ESSER dollars do they need to start to spend down. It wasn't until it started to become clear that those dollars weren't going to hang around that people really started to focus on, well, what have we been getting for that money we've spent? What are we getting for the money we're spending? And then, quite frankly, Matt, that's where a lot of very disappointing, I think, artifacts were found or contracts were found where vendors were getting paid multi millions of dollars and barely delivering any service back to the district or state.
Yeah, and I just want to double down on when you say off the books, that's saying the impetus with ESSER dollars was to spend them. They were
Yes.
allocated as things that you had a literal time window in which to spend. So you can it's not like a there was not a malicious intent on on behalf of school leaders to spend them. It was essentially what they were ordered to do. Like it
Yep.
wasn't something they were given the option of. And so I think in retrospect, most of us wish that they had a little bit more latitude to in how they could spend those dollars. I don't think we need to litigate that, but
Yep.
the reality is that's what happened, and it created a little bit of a vortex around the industry. And so I think as we move forward, I'm curious to hear your perspective on some the ways that some of the states are now tracking it. So with building those foundations, and I think you've got it a handful of state customers that you're working on this with. And I understood that it's probably not perfect. I'm sure there's lots of room for improvement, but could you just give some examples of how states or even districts are setting that foundation? I think it's a really good analogy.
Yes. So, um, in my opinion, one of the states today that is doing this the best is the state of Florida. And they're running a program called the Florida Tutoring Advantage. And the reason why I believe Florida has been as successful as they have in the first year and a half of this program is the first call they made was for infrastructure. A lot of states and districts focus on doing tutoring. Okay, let's go get 10 tutoring companies signed up. They get signed up, they start, and then it's like, oh, how are we going to track these vendors? Florida took it a different path where they started with infrastructure. So the way they're program is modeled is a dual path model, where on one side of the fence, Florida has procured, tutor management system licenses to be able to give to districts who want to do their own in-house tutoring. These are districts that have the community interested in supporting retired teachers, university students, paraprofessionals that are all willing to do the tutoring, but the districts needed the infrastructure to make it easy for scheduling, data collection, data submission. On the other side of the fence, Florida knew that not every district was going to have the capacity to do it on their own. So they approved of over 20 tutoring vendors that through a matching process, the state would be able to match a specific district with a need to a specific in person or virtual vendor that could solve that need and structure them through outcomes based contracts. So that sounds perfect from an execution perspective. But when you think about the infrastructure, how do you track that? Florida procured the data hub that we provide to states and districts, where we are actually collecting the data for vendors that are working with these districts, pairing it with the data we're collecting from the districts running their own service, and then sending all of that data to Florida's data lake or data lagoon, as they like to call it there, so that they can start to analyze, hey,
Not data
which of
swamp.
these, no, not data swamp, not data swamp, be able to focus on, hey, which of these vendors achieved this attendance outcome? Which of these vendors achieved this dosage outcome? Which of these vendors achieved these academic outcomes? And then be able to pay them accordingly there. So the state of Florida is one today that is running an incredibly meaningful program. The first partner we ever worked with was the Illinois Tutoring Initiative that I believe is an amazing model where the state of Illinois recruited over 3,000 community members to serve as tutors in over 100 something districts across the state. That program unfortunately didn't get funded past ESSER, but saw some great academic outcomes as well as actual community pipeline outcomes of bringing community members into the schools, getting them placed with those schools. And then, on the district side, Guilford County in North Carolina actually used ESSER to recruit over 1,000 tutors to work in their community, had this amazing program, but as ESSER was running up, realized they had to really refine and focus their program. So they used ESSER almost as a testing bed to see what worked. And then now that ESSER has left, really refine their program down to supporting the most at need students, no matter where they are in the district.
That's awesome. And I'm curious at whether we will enter a world where every state has some form of tutoring, or if it's going to be a little bit more ad hoc. Um, Can you tell me, like, one of the things reading the report, which actually, before we even get there, I have some questions about the report, but can you just give a quick overview of what the report is, what we endeavored to cover in it, and how you hope that it helps industry practitioners?
Yeah. So during ESSER, as the state and district programs were being stood up, there'd be districts right next to each other that were both trying to solve the same problem and wouldn't communicate. So, as Pearl would meet these different districts and states, we realized there wasn't as much knowledge sharing going on in the space that had a very tight window to prove efficacy. So, we started hosting a spring summit where we invited all our state and district partners together just to learn from each other and hear what's working and what's not working. As ESSER started to subside and the cliff started to hit, we realized that everyone in the nation had the same question of what is tutoring going to look like post ESSER? Is it going to be here post ESSER? Is high impact tutoring going to stay? Is it going to move to more informal tutoring? Like, what does this world look like for an industry that was truly accelerated due to these stimulus dollars that are now leaving? What does that look like? And quite frankly, Pearl had some assumptions, but we also wanted to validate those assumptions. So that's where, we were able to get connected with you, with Ben, with the whiteboard team, be able to share almost our concern or share the Fact that this industry had turned into a black box for most, and we wanted to bring some more transparency to it. So, this isn't, though, a task that we think is a one time thing. Like, we think this needs to be recurring to be able to show not just what Esther did, but then how this industry evolves and truly finds sustainability at the end of the day without all these stimulus dollars in market.
That makes sense. And, I think it's something we were really excited that you came to us with and, took a lot of pride in getting to work on this report with y'all. One of the things that stuck out to me in sort of working through the report was the focus on high dosage tutoring. And, I think like there's very little question that high dosage tutoring is effective, but it's a really specific intervention, right? It costs quite a lot, both in time and financially,
Mhm.
such that it can only ever reach a limited set of the school population. I'm curious, did that surprise you? Was that sort of what you expected? Do you think that'll change? Like, how do we reconcile the like positive outcome that high dosage does create and has been proven to create with the sort of limited audience that it can reach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things my team constantly talks about when it comes to product development is the ideal versus real world. Ideally, everyone's able to do high impact tutoring. Group sizes no more than four, 3 sessions a week, 30 minutes per session at least, same tutor every time, curriculum tied to the classroom, tutors trained well. Everything I just shared has to be done in order for that to be true, which we can easily see how big of a logistical lift that becomes. So, a couple thoughts here. One, it was very encouraging to see how consistent a theme high dosage tutoring is still right now in market. I mean, we heard it from nearly every state and district mention it at least once. And a lot of that's the credit to the work the National Student Support Accelerator has done to bring what works into um, really into the spotlight. However, I don't believe that that is the only model of tutoring that can be effective. And right now, there are so many students in this nation that need to catch up to pace that it can't be the only one that's effective. We need to be able to find more scalable, lower lift forms of intervention that still achieve a lot of those outcomes for high dosage for, the 80% of students that the district can't afford to buy high dosage tutoring for. So that's one of the things actually that, makes me the most excited to get out of bed every day. Because Pearl, all of our partners running tutoring programs aren't running only high dosage or high impact tutoring. They're making these unique models based on high dosage principles, but the reality of their world. So in a single day, Pearl is seeing, 20 different designed programs all modeled off high dosage tutoring taking place through the platform. So we're building a very unique and diverse data set that hopefully is going to allow us and some of our research partners to start to identify, are there other models that are based off the image of high dosage tutoring that prove effective in certain scenarios or environments that we can help spread the word on.
That makes a ton of sense. And, I think again, like one of the things that attracted us as we thought about putting this report together with you was this thought that we could make it a tool for administrators to say,
Yep.
like, how can we experiment? Like fundamentally, every district leader, every school leader is fighting a battle of finite resources and trying to find ways to get to make them for to help them make the most of those resources is something that I think will be an evergreen problem for a long
Yep.
time, but is something that I hope can be really impactful when done well. So
Yeah. And
that was very exciting. Yeah.
yeah, because and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but I think that is also a place where relationship based human AI tools can really start to come into play. Where there's one where the human meets with a group of three students on Monday, and then on Tuesday, the students meet with an AI that can then give a feedback to the human about what was covered. Like, I think that's a very interesting opportunity to keep humans in. but I'm sure we'll get to that a bit later in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should, bite the AI bullet and just talk about it. We made it 19 and a half minutes before we said the word AI, so that may or may not be a new record on this in this interview series. But yeah, I think like let's do it. So what's the future here? Like, are we going to have, is it going to be the 2 hour learning organization that shall not be named, where the academics happen in an individual environment, um, an individual software driven environment, or is there still going to be a classroom as we sort of construct it today? What is the role of AI both in education and in the tutoring industry specifically?
Yeah.
And caveat emptor, like, yeah, lots of things will happen. So just feel free to share your opinion. You don't have to. We all know that you care about the teachers and the students in the classroom, and just want the best for them.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I tell founders or CEOs who approach me about our approach to AI and how they can start to do it, step one, you got to get back to your culture, your values, and your why. And if you're not building an AI tool to help accelerate your why or help the humans who you're helping achieve that why better, then you shouldn't build something. Like, you shouldn't be building something just to build. You should build because there's very explicit examples of how that facilitates your why and why you exist. So why does Pearl exist? Pearl exists to bring relationship-based learning to the world. Like, my success story was one of a relationship that sparked my academic potential. So that's what we want to bring to the world. So we think about AI as, how can it help us accelerate this relationship-based learning and accelerate the adoption of it? So from my perspective, I mean, Matt, you were probably on some of these interviews. You heard how logistically heavy standing up tutoring programs are. You have 10,000 students, 1,000 tutors. You got to match them. You got to schedule them. You got to find the room for them to be in. You got to create the lesson plan for them. You got to create the materials for them. You got to make sure the data collection's going. It's going to someone to analyze it, to then improve the, very logistically heavy. We have seen already that some of the most successfully adopted AI tools outside of education broadly are ones that help reduce that operational lift. So, in my opinion, people may say AI's biggest opportunity for impact in education is so that every student has their own AI to learn from at any time. I disagree with that. I believe the single most important opportunity AI has in education is to remove the logistical burden that educators feel today that stop them from building those relationships. So we want to remove all of the time it takes scheduling, matching, changing schedules. Let the AI do that so the human can focus on the kid, which is really why they got into education in the first place. So I believe those solutions are going to be the ones that win out. I also believe that the more unique the data set, the better your tool is going to be. But lastly here, 24/7 support has never been the problem. In the year 2000, tutor.com was founded. They've always promised, hey, there's a human somewhere online ready to answer your
Hmm.
question. 24/7 support's never been the problem. The issue with 24/7 support are a couple things. One, only the A+ students use it. Because, Matt, I was a B student. If I had a question, I wasn't logging into some website to ask some human to help me. I was circling C and just moving on to the next question because I wanted to go play basketball with my buddies. So, like, one, 24/7 on-demand support rarely ever gets used by the students who need it the most. The second aspect is the students who do use it rarely, or the students who do need it and use it, rarely ask for help learning. They ask for the answer. And if you don't give them the answer, they're going to give you a 0 out of 5 stars and then go look for the next person who does give them the answer. So,
Huh.
and we saw this very much with Esser. Like, we don't need to say the company that, won the on demand game and everything that's happened since then. So, when I see these companies trying to release AI tutors and say, great news, there's an AI tutor. Kids just go to them and ask them for help. They're missing the whole point here. Like, if you don't solve the motivational aspect behind the student's why, they're never going to use your tool. So, in my opinion, once again, these AI tutors that are out there that any student can go and use, they're going to use them to cheat a lot of the time. You can try to stop that, but they're still going to jailbreak it to be able to get that outcome. So, I understand, especially from the venture perspective, how, AI tutor, the TAM, the math is amazing.
It's
But
the
at the end
TAM,
of the
John.
day,
It's the TAM.
it's always the TAM. Always got to be building that TAM back. But we're in education, so that's not why we're in it. However, we'll leave that to the side. At the end of the day, 24/7 support wasn't the problem. It was the motivation behind the students. How do they get the support? Why did they get the support? And what do they do with the support? So just releasing an AI isn't going to solve that problem. You need to think about how you can embed it in a prescribed tutoring model or supplement a prescribed tutoring model to mitigate some of the downsides of real human tutoring.
Yeah, I really appreciate the incentives problem that you framed, and this applies just as much to AI as it does to humans. In that, like, the fundamentally what many people are looking for in a tutor is the right answer, and if they don't get it, they're not going to use the tool, and that like that's a whole like mindset shift. That, like, yeah, you can design a tutor that uses the Socratic method, but fundamentally, like, the incentive is for the student to churn.
Yep.
And we know that at its very foundation, like, learning is about friction, and having to go through the sort of valley of despair often, to learn something, and that's just fundamentally at odds with the AI tutor. So you know, it makes sense from a, like, logical standpoint, but I hadn't heard it articulated that way before. Thank you.
Yeah. But,
Um,
that's the perspective of someone who's been eat, sleep, breathing this industry for 10 years and have seen this mistake made over and over and over
yeah,
again. Like, this
yeah,
has always been the problem, and I think it's gonna be solved this time, but, AI is not that silver bullet yet in education. Could it become?
sure.
Who knows? Smarter people than us can answer that question, but
Yeah. So a couple more questions before we wrap here. So one, were there any takeaways from the report that surprised you? I think the high dosage thing, struck me, but didn't surprise me, if that makes sense. As an output of the report, of, like, I knew it was important. I don't think I realized quite the extent to which that the industry had indexed on that specific modality. So, like, it was helpful to see. But were there any things in the report that, like, really stuck out and surprised you?
the desire to maintain high dosage versus try to find some lesser ground was a very encouraging surprise because it's like, okay, people are listening to the evidence. Um, Now it's not as big a surprise, but I think the binary fashion states view tutoring post-ESSER also somewhat surprised me, where it was either yes or no. It was
Hmm.
either, yes, we did this, we're going to try this out and figure out how to make it stay, or we tried this, it didn't work. We're seeing all the research from everywhere else about it working, but it didn't work here, so we're just going to go on to the next thing. And the reason why that surprised me is very few things in education have the body of evidence that high dosage tutoring has. So it's something that we found has worked. So the folks who are like, okay, this works, maybe it's not financially sustainable, but let's see if we can figure that out, versus the folks who said, hey, it works, but it didn't work for us. And financially it's not going to work, so we're just going to move on and try to find something else. Like, I think that was encouraging but surprising at the end of the day to see something work as well as this did when implemented the right way and still have such a binary perspective. But I think a lot of things in education in this country are becoming pretty binary, which just kind of picks up on that thread or that theme there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One more sort of future looking question. When you think about the sort of classroom of the future, and think about it in the context of a relatively short term horizon. So somewhere on the order of like 5 years, 5 to 8 years. So not tomorrow, because then you're lost in the trees, and not 20 years, because then you can just sort of be hand wavy. But what are some of the characteristics of that classroom 5 years from now that you think are different than the classroom of today?
Um, when it comes to things that are different, the way I'm thinking about it is more the things that I want to make sure are still there. Because I think the pace at which AI is evolving right now, we probably couldn't guess where we were today 2 years ago. So, 8 years is going to be an interesting time. But there's going to be way more connectivity from a technological perspective. So, if every student doesn't have a device yet, they're going to be having them. Um, what I hope it doesn't turn into is isolation through personalization, if that makes any sense. Where
Yeah.
one of the beauties of technology is the way it can personalize academics to specific students. One of the beauties of technology and something like Facebook when it first came together was how it can connect people from around the world. However, we've probably seen technology does as much separating of humans as it does bringing humans together. So, as we bring this personalization aspect that tech can bring into the classroom, what I hope it doesn't do is build silos between students and classes. Because at the end of the day, relationships from my perspective, are still what matter the most when it comes to education. So I'm very excited and bullish on the way technology can help personalize education for students, but want to make sure that as students grow up and go through first, fifth, ninth grade, they're not losing that human connection or really what it means to be a human in those environments, those learning environments, dealing with the friction, dealing with the struggle, and not just looking for the bot that can get them the answer as quick as possible.
Yeah. I think that is a noble goal, and something I'd like to swim towards as well. Um, John, I've taken far too much of your time. Thank you for being so gracious with it.
Of course.
And I'm excited to keep working on this challenge with you, and I hope folks really enjoy reading the report.
Likewise. I appreciate it, Matt.
All right.